Esther chapter 5, verse 1. Now it happened on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace across from the king's house. And while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house, so it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court that she, and I probably ought to give you a review for that too, because that's where we left off. King Xerxes, he had a 6-month party for his officials, trying to convince them to go to war. He goes to war, or excuse me, before he goes to war, while he's there at the party, Queen Vashti doesn't want to flaunt herself in front of all of the guests from the entire nation, and so they depose her. The king goes off to war and gets routed in the history that we talked about last week. To cheer him up after his return, they have a beauty contest where they are going to fill the queen's position by the prettiest lady in the county. Esther wins that and becomes the queen. The king's right-hand man plots to kill all of the Jews, unaware that the queen is one of them, because he hated the single man. The law is made that they will genocide the Jews, and the dice roll that came up would be for the very last month of the year. Esther finds out from her cousin, who raised her, and that she should risk her life and go before the king unannounced to intercede for her people. And that is what she did. In Esther chapter 5, verse 2, so it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court that she found favor in his sight, and the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter, and the king said to her, "What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request?" "So it shall be given to you up to half the kingdom." So Esther answered, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him. Verse 5, Then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said." So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther prepared. At the banquet of the wine of the king said to Esther, "What is your petition? It shall be granted to you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom." This is the second time he's given her that offer. "And it shall be done." Then Esther answered and said, "My petition and request is this. If you have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I prepared for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said." Now, we're not going to read all next of the 4 chapters. We are going to read the 10 verses in chapter 7 because it's just amazing how God works. But we're going to read just point verses here and there. What I want to get across to us here is that she risked her life to show up before the king. She was a bold woman. She even went, I don't know, they didn't say if it was compulsory or not that all of the ladies join for this beauty contest. But regardless, she showed up for it anyway. She was a bold person. The king recognized that she was bold and that she took her life into her own hands. And so out of curiosity, he granted her her life. In fact, he said there must be something pretty bad, or she has a really big request to come before me and risk her life. So whatever it is, it's got to be at least worth half of my kingdom. And that's what he offers her. Then she asked him and his vizier, Haman, to show up for supper. Now, I don't know about you guys, but it's been a very long time since my wife was willing to risk her life to cook me a meal. Yeah, I'll leave that right there. But regardless, that's what she asks. Now you think about it. The king's like, well, I don't know of anybody that's been willing to risk their life to cook me a meal either. There's got to be more to this. So they're sitting down, they have this great meal, And now the king is expecting the big question. So he asks again, all right, it's got to be at least worth half the kingdom, right? And so she asks for them to show up again. The same time tomorrow. Now the king's really interested. Not only did she risk her life for this question, she cooked me a meal to ask this question, and now she's going to cook me 2 meals? The text doesn't tell us why she waited this night. There's been lots of speculation if she chickened out, or if she wanted it for a reason to kind of string him along. The text doesn't tell us. But as Christians, we know why she waited. Because not all of the pieces for God's chess game were in place yet. In chapter 5, verse 9 through 14, after the first feast, Haman goes home all fat and happy, and he brags to his family about how wonderful he is and how great things are going for him. He thought he was big stuff. But there was a problem. When he was on his way home, he passed through the city gates and he saw Mordecai sitting there. And he's like, you know what? I'd give all of this up if I could just have that man dead. Well, you remember, every day he sees Mordecai is just a day that the dice weren't in his favor. Because he had made the law, he talked to the king, convinced the king of the law that we're going to genocide all of the Jews. I'm going to pay you a big bribe. And so they threw the dice and it ended up the last day of the month. So if nothing else, every single day for a year, he was going to have to look at Mordecai as he went by. And so he tells his wife, man, I'd give all of this up if I could just kill that man. So, being the good wife, she suggests, well, hey, why don't you just put up an impaling pole 75 feet tall in the front yard, go to the king tomorrow and ask for his head? Haman thought, well, that's a pretty good idea. Can't be too bad, right? It's got to be pretty easy. We can make this work. So that night, now think about it. They have the whole day of work. They come for that feast that evening. He goes home, and by the next morning, he's already set the pole up to have Mordecai impaled on it 75 feet in the air. Just by chance, while they're erecting this 75-foot sharp pole in Haman's front yard, the king can't sleep. So, as the king, he decides, well, let's read some history. That'll put me out. And just by chance, his reader is flipping through the pages and he comes across the page that was 5 years before. And it just so happens it was about a plot that the king would be assassinated. 5 years. Of all of the places he could have flipped through, 5 years before. And so the king's interested. Wow, they were going to kill me. What did we do for the guy that told me about that, this Mordecai? Oh, we didn't do anything, king. We didn't do nothing for the guy. Well, the king goes to sleep. The next morning, let's see if I'm in the right spot here. Nope, I'm not. He is. The next morning, verse 4 of chapter 6, the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to suggest to the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows or the impaling pole that he had prepared for him. The king's servant said to him, well, Haman's here, standing in the court. And the king said, let him come in. In verses 6 through 11, the king says, hey, Haman, what should I do for the guy that I want to honor? Well, Haman's so big-headed, all he could think of, well, it's got to be me. And he says, well, you dress him up in royal robes and you parade him all around the city and just make him king for a day. Can you imagine Haman's face when the words Mordecai came out of his mouth. He was just going to kill the guy. And all of a sudden the king says, this is the guy that I like. Make him king for a day. Oh, as a matter of fact, why don't you take him by a horse and lead him all the way through? And you announce that this man is praised by the king. I'm pretty sure Haman was not doing his job with his whole heart that day. I'm pretty sure he was not a happy camper. Isn't it interesting that Haman hated Mordecai so much that he got up bright and early before anybody else would show up to court just so he can be the first to see the king? And it just so happens that the king, wanting to honor this man that had saved his life, was going to show up to be the first in the court that day to send out the very first guy he saw to honor this Mordecai. Man, what luck. Haman's luck isn't too good right now. The dice aren't rolling in his favor. Verse 12. After that took place, Mordecai went back to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning with his head covered. By the end of today, we will see that twice. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all of his friends everything that had happened to him, his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but surely fall before him. While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hastened to bring Haman to the second banquet which Esther had prepared. Now this shows you how superstitious the Persians were. They believed heavily in fate and the dice roll. And old Zeresh, he goes home, Haman goes home to his wife Zeresh, and he's expecting to say, oh, honey, it's okay. It was just one bad day. Don't worry about it. It'll be better tomorrow. Go sleep on it. Everything's going to be fine. You're going to go to the banquet tonight. Have a good day. It's okay. It's no big deal. But she doesn't. She actually prophesies over Haman's life. And she says, buddy, if the dice are this bad against you, you're going to lose the game. And notice how it says it. While they were still talking to him, she gives this prophecy that, buddy, you're going to fail. While they're talking to him, the king's eunuchs come because he was already late for the banquet where he was the guest of honor. Now, I want to read chapter 7, and I want us to picture it in our minds. This has such a fast turnaround in chapter 7, you'd think Alfred Hitchcock wrote it. I mean, it's just... So let's read it. Chapter 7, verse 1. So the king and Haman went in to dine with Queen Esther. On the second day, at the banquet of wine, the king again said to Esther, what is your petition, Queen Esther? That it shall be granted to you. This is the third time he's asked this question. And what is your request? Up to half the kingdom it shall be done. Then Queen Esther answered and said, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For if we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated, had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss. In other words, she said, if he would have just wanted to sell us off as slaves, I wouldn't have said a thing. But he's wanting to genocide all of my people and me. So King Ahasuerus answered and said to the queen, who is he and where is he? Who would dare presume his heart to do such a thing? Now, can you imagine Haman's face here? King, I got to go to the bathroom. You know that second course, my stomach's bothering me a little bit. Oh boy. By the way, chapter 7 verse 5 is the writing on the wall for Haman, and we're going to talk about it in a little while. Verse 6, and Esther said, the adversary and the enemy is the wicked Haman. So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Then the king arose in his wrath. By the way, King Ahasuerus, Xerxes, if you go for the Greek, he had a really bad temper. History tells us this, and so does the scriptures. But he had a furious temper. And so he gets up, and he's such in a rage, he realizes he has to leave the room, or he's going to tear Haman apart. So he leaves the room in his wrath from the banquet of wine, and he went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before the Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw the evil was determined against him by the king. No joke. When the king returned from the palace guard to the place where the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, "Will he also assault the queen while I'm in the house?" As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Poor Haman. He's begging for his life, and as he's begging for his life, he trips, falls on the couch in front of Esther, and it looks like he's trying to do something nefarious as the king walks in the door. Man, when the dice are against you. They covered his head. Now, that would have been bad enough. You know, the guy's going to die, right? But yet somebody has to open his mouth. And now Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, "Oh, look, I just remembered. The gallows, 50 cubits high, 75 feet tall, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman. What do you know?" Then the king said, "Hang him on it." Boy, you thought Haman would have said, "Keep your mouth shut, buddy. You don't need to talk about that." Huh. It's amazing that Harbona just remembered at that opportune time that there was a pole in Haman's front yard. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided. Esther is given all of Haman's estate. Mordecai is given Haman's position in chapter 8, verses 1 and 2. Chapter 8, verse 7, then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordecai, the Jew, "Indeed, I have given Esther the house of Haman," and they hanged him on the gallows because he tried to lay his hand on the Jews. Get this. This is the king that owns from Ethiopia to India. Okay? He's a big, important guy. You write yourselves the decree concerning the Jews, as you please, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For whatever is written in the king's name and sealed the king's ring, no one can revoke. Think about this. You write the law. You do it however you want. I'll claim it to my name. I will put my signet on it, and it can't be changed by not even me. Wow. What a turnaround. Now, if you had that kind of rule, if President Biden came up and said, "I've got a bunch of executive orders, and I'm going to let you fill them out any way you want," what would you have done? I don't know about you, but there'd be a bunch of things I'd be changing. Boy, I tell you what, I might be vice president. I might have a seat on the Supreme Court. I guarantee you I'm going to own like New Jersey. Anything I want, you better believe it, buddy. Look what they did. In chapters 8, 11 through 13, the law that they made that was distributed from Ethiopia to India said that the Jews could gather together, protect themselves, protect their lives, to destroy, kill, and annihilate all of the forces of any people or province that would assault them, both little children and women, and to plunder their possessions. Now, if someone's trying to kill you, and you're going to make a law, it'd be a pretty good idea to say, yes, you can defend yourself, and when you fight back, if they die and you can kill them, you get their stuff. Back then in ancient times, whoever won the war got the spoils. That's a pretty reasonable rule. Now, what they actually did is in chapter 9, verse 10. They killed Haman's 10 sons who are listed before that. But look, they did not lay a hand on the plunder. Haman, I mean, he was a rich man, and they didn't take his stuff. Verse 12, and the king said to Esther, you have killed and destroyed 500 men in Susha, the capital, in the capital city, and Haman's 10 sons. So they're up to 510. And they've done what in the rest of the provinces? This all should be done. What else do you want me to do? And Esther said, please let the king be granted that they can attack essentially tomorrow. And put the 10 sons on pikes as well. So that's exactly what happened. And now verse 15. They gathered together on the 14th day. They attacked the 12th and the 13th. On the 14th they had a celebration. And look, 300 men in Susha died. So now you're up to 810. But they still didn't lay a hand on the plunder. Haman was a rich man, powerful man. He had 800 men just inside the city capital. Verse 16, and the remainder of the Jews in the king's provinces, they protected themselves and killed 75,000 enemies. But they did not lay a hand on the plunder. They'd even made it law that they could. But they were pleased to just be able to protect themselves. Now you think about it, this is in 2 days. Nearly 76,000 people died because they attacked the Jews in 2 days. They didn't say they were going after anybody else. Just the people that wanted to attack them. And the dummies were brain dead enough to go against them. And they attacked the Jews, and the Jews killed nearly 1,000 people in 2 days. Can you imagine what would have happened if luck wouldn't have been on the side of the Jews? Was it really lucky? Because here it comes. Here comes the application. Stick with me. Was it really lucky that Esther's name, even though it was Persian, her Hebrew name was Hadassah, but her Persian given name was Esther, which in Hebrew is Hester, something hidden? Was it really lucky when King David had mercy on Shimei and the rest of Saul's family, and because of that Mordecai was able to defeat the plot? Was it really lucky that later on Mordecai would raise his cousin as his own daughter? That Queen Vashti would not degrade herself? I have would, and it's not supposed to be there. That King Xerxes had come home defeated and he was looking for love? He had an extensive harem. Why did he need another queen? Was it really lucky when Esther would win over all of the girls in the capital? And Mordecai would thwart an assassination attempt and not be rewarded for it? That the dice rolled, the pur would end up at the last month of the year? That Esther would risk her life for her people? That Xerxes would grant Esther's life? He hadn't seen her in a month, the scripture tells us. Was it really lucky when Esther would delay her request one night, and that on the night that she didn't give the question, Haman builds a gallows in his front yard and the king can't sleep? Is it really lucky when there was of all of the places the guy could have opened up and read, it went 5 years ago to the very story of Mordecai not being rewarded? Was it really lucky when Haman was the first in the court to ask for Mordecai's head? That Haman was to lead Mordecai around in royal clothes? Was it really lucky when the king would come back in the room as Haman trips in front of Esther? Was it really lucky that the eunuch remembers the gallows that Haman had built the night before? Was it really lucky when Esther would gain Haman's entire household and Mordecai would gain his position? Was it really lucky that the Jews would have had such a decisive victory against all those who tried to destroy him? We said last week, Proverbs chapter 16, verse 33, the lot is cast into the lap, but every decision is from the Lord. There's no luck. You can play dice all you want, but guess what? God's going to win. Yeah. I told you before, you can't find the name of God in the pages overtly anywhere in this book. And you can't find anything of worship, nothing religious. It looks like God's not even there, and he's just letting them happen what happens. Deuteronomy 31 verse 16 says that God promised that when they disobeyed and followed the other gods, that he would hide his face from them. And that's exactly what's happening in Esther. But we actually find that God's name is hidden in the text 8 times. Now, I'm going to go very quickly through this, but I want you to get it. Every time there was a turning point in the book of Esther, if you look at the letters, you not only find God's name, but you find it in the direction of what took place. If, for example, chapter 1, verse 20, Mordecai announces that he wants to depose Vashti, you find God's name spelled backwards because he's turning back the counsel of the Gentiles. Then you go to chapter 5, verse 4, you find when Esther invites the king and Haman to a banquet, you see God's name again, YHVH, and it's forward this time because he's working for the Jews. The first one, God initiates what's happening. Whether it's Queen Vashti being deposed so Esther can stand up, or whether it's Esther pleading with the king to come for a meal. God's the one initiating. In chapter 5, verse 13, Haman's gloating with his family. And we find the same thing we found in chapter 1, verse 20. He's all proud of himself. You find the name of Yahweh, but it's backwards. Because he says, Haman, you think you know what's going to happen, but I'm going to turn back what you said. And then chapter 7, verse 7, when Haman actually comes to an end, you find the name of the Lord again. This time it's forward because he's working for his people. I wish I had more time to just go into greater detail. There's so much more here that I wish I could give you. This isn't my stuff, the stuff I've made up. This is in the Jewish Talmud for thousands of years. Every time God's name is backwards, it's in reference to the Gentiles. Every time God's name you find it going forwards, it's in reference to the Jews. Whether it's him initiating something to take place or whether it's him finalizing it, his name shows up. Also, in chapter 7, verse 5, when the king asked, who is he and where is he? You know, this was Haman's end right here. Not just do you find the name of YHVH, you also find I am written in the text. The same I am that rescued the children of Israel from Pharaoh's hand, we're going to rescue the children of Israel from Haman's hand. And you find his name there. And there's a lot more. And I wish I could tell you all. But you find Messiah, Mashiach, you find Yeshua, Jesus, you find El Shaddai, the Almighty. There's a lot more. And I wish I could tell you all. But you find Messiah, Mashiach, you find Yeshua, Jesus, you find El Shaddai, the Almighty. And that's detailed in the words. But here's the point. While it looks like things are out of control, behind the scenes there is a God who hasn't surrendered his authority. Yeah. Whether you see God's work or not, whether you believe his work or not, right, he's at work, and there's nothing that will thwart his plan. Amen. How many times have you looked back at a bad situation and you've seen God's hand and that he worked the details out for good? It's happened a lot. Amen. And just by chance, do you think you've probably missed a few? Man, I know I have. How many times we've missed. But I want you to think about this with me. God doesn't just know the past. He knows it, right? He knows all things. He doesn't just know what happened in the past. Daniel, zoom down on that, son. They can't read nothing. God doesn't just know the past. You know what he also knows? He knows the future. We don't know anything about the future. We can look back and we can say that we have 20/20 vision, but we really miss a lot. God says, hey, I want you to know, I know the future. I know what's going to happen. I can plan in your life and good things come out. I've got good things in store for you if you just listen to me. He knows our future. And the only way we know anything about the future is if he reveals it to us. How much greater are his plans when he sees the past and the future than ours? But there's more than that. We know that he sees the present too. Nothing surprises him. God sees our past. He sees our future. and he sees our present. But there's one other thing that he sees. 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 7. But the Lord said to Samuel as he's trying to pick out a king, do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see a man as a man sees. For man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. God sees our past. He sees our future. He sees our present. But he also sees our heart. He sees it all. He knows it all. And when he says he wants to use you to accomplish his purpose, guess what? He knows exactly who you are. He knows what you're going through. He knows the obstacles you face. He knows your fears. He knows how hard you're trying. He sees every tear that falls. He knows every He knows every prayer you have prayed. And you know what? We know. This is the very end. There's something that we know that he knows. Romans chapter 8. I wish I could throw this in every single sermon I ever preach. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. For whom he foreknown, he also predestined to be conformed in the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. Moreover, whom he predestined, he also called. And whom he called, he also justifies. And whom he justified, he also glorifies. What shall we say to all these things? If God be for us, who can be against us? Amen. Who did not spare his own Son, but delivered him up for us all? How shall he not with him also freely give us all things? Who shall bring charge against God's elect? It's God who justifies. Who is it that condemns? It's Christ Jesus who died, and furthermore is risen, who is even at the right hand of God, who also makes intercession for us. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, or distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or peril, or sword? As it is written, for your sake we are killed all the day long. We are counted sheep for the slaughter. Yet in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Haman brought an entire nation against the children of Israel and wanted to wipe them out in a day. They were considered sheep for the slaughter. They were considered a bribe. But God said, oh no, you're going to be more than conquerors. For I am persuaded that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other created thing shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. If God be for you, who can be against you? In every situation you face, in every struggle you go through, whether you see him or not, he is the one moving the chess pieces. How can Satan succeed when God knows the end from the beginning? He knows where you're at now, and he knows your very heart. The time for the church to work is now. Daylight on the Gentiles is dimming, and it's late in the day. We need to work hard while the sun shines, because there will be a time when the time of working will be no more, Jesus said. And there's only one of two camps to be in. You can join Haman and his crew and say, God, you're not going to use me. Or you can be used by God like Esther for such a time as this and watch him do miracles for you. Would you stand with me?
Hi everyone, thank you so much for watching. I pray this video was a blessing to you. If it was, please hit the like button. This helps other people find our content as well. You can also subscribe to the channel by clicking on my beautiful face. This will give you announcements when we put out new videos. Here in the link section, you'll find playlists of our verse-by-verse Bible studies, and then you'll also see the newest video that we've put out. We try to put out 2 or 3 a week. I pray that God richly blesses you. Thank you for watching.